So you saw, earlier today, you saw about narratives, and we need more narratives. So I'm going to start with giving you my answer to the question, what can we do? Well, we can tell stories. We can talk about what we see. We can talk about the truth. And we can talk about what is actually there, rather than buying into what you also saw was some very disruptive narratives that is very, very damaging. And they are damaging not only, of course, to the lives and health of migrants, but also to us. Because the first thing I'm going to tell you is that we're not different. So the idea of global goals is that they are global. And it's actually all about us, how we work, what we do. So localizing the Sustainable Development Goals needs to be done through sustainable policies. And it might seem obvious, but apparently it's not. So sustainable development, you probably know this, but sustainable development, quite often we talk about the three aspects. We talk about the financial, the social, and the ecological. And at least in Sweden, where I work, mostly if you say sustainable development or sustainability, people would think about ecological sustainability. They will think about buying organic food. They might think of fair trade. If they do think about something that has to do with financial or social responsibilities. But in general, there is an idea that these are actually opposing things, that there's the financial interest, and then there's the interest of being good. So there's a split narrative, which I will tell you is a false dichotomy. It is not opposing interests. Rather the opposite, actually. And the idea, of course, of the sustainable development is trying to make that link to show how they are interdependent. That you can actually not get financial sustainability without including the ecological and social factors. Because, in fact, when we are polluting our environment, it's like we are saving money, maybe, now, but we're also building up a debt. And debts, as you know, there's always an interest. They're always more expensive in the end. And of course, right now, the planet is at the point where we have to start paying that debt. And it's getting really, really expensive. And we're seeing this in migration as well. So it's a package deal. It's virtually impossible to achieve one of the sustainability areas or sustainability goals without achieving, or at least trying to achieve, the other ones. So what does this mean? Well, we have an agenda. It's a plan for prosperity. And of course, this is some tall goals we have. We're going to eradicate poverty. We're going to save the world. So the story of Agenda 2030 is about saving the world. Now, the world, as we know, is fighting quite desperately to not be saved at the moment. And for all of us who are working in the human rights field, we feel this quite physically at times. And it is very, very easy to become super depressed about this, because I see people around me that are literally not working in a very sustainable fashion. So one story I'm going to tell you is that you need to act, and you need to do something, because everybody can do something, but nobody can do everything. And we need to do it together. And that, for me, that's the core message when we talk about localization. It doesn't have to be more difficult than that. So the 17 goals, they're, of course, interlinked. And when we, just to give you an example, when we reduce maternal death which is one part of the health goal. We strengthen communities, we reduce poverty, we create stronger economies that will reduce causes of migration. So, you know, it fits together. And you know this, right? Yeah, okay. So, isn't it strange that quite often when we talk about development goals and we talk about development, we're talking about something over there. We talk about how them over there, and I think you said that quite often people think about the goal of equality, it's just the top one, it's about the 40%. But actually, of course, all of these goals has to do with everyone. And I find it quite funny, actually, that we put quite a lot of effort in, especially the humanitarian field, and when we talk about development aid, we tell the Global South that in order for them to achieve financial viability and stability, they need to do this in a sustainable fashion. So we know this, you know. But then at the same time, when we're implementing our own policies, it's like that doesn't apply to us. And it's ridiculous because, of course, the evidence is the same. We can't act in a non-sustainable fashion and expect sustainable results. So leading by example is not only an ideal, it's a necessity. So that's also one of my key things. Whatever you do, try to lead by example. So every one of you is a leader in some way, maybe not in the same way as me, but think about it. You can lead responsibly. So in health, we talk about social determinants quite a bit. A social determinant is basically something that will affect your health in some way, but of course you also speak about social determinants when it comes to unemployment or other things. And incidentally, social determinants for one thing is quite often, it's quite often interlinked. So when it comes to health, the ability to work and learn is of course affected by your well-being. And if you have housing, if you have work, it affects your health. And it's quite easy to, when you sit in a situation like this, to become either really theoretical and removed, or that you feel a little bit less positive about the world. So now I'm gonna bring you right to the bottom, because the realization of the global goals, it's a matter of life and death. I'm gonna show you a picture. And I want you to look at her. This is a little girl who unfortunately died in the hands of my colleagues. It's been a couple of years now, but she still makes me cry. So I would like you to look at her. Because for me, this is the sustainable development that we're talking about. We're talking about children, women, boys, men, old people. We're talking about death. But we're also talking about life. We're talking about how to live and how to make this work. So in our clinics, we see mostly, we see a lot of undocumented people. In Sweden, we work with, so that's one of the things we do in Doctors of the World. We always work domestically with our program. So we work over there, but we work in our own countries with the realization that human rights is not realized even where we live. In our clinic in Stockholm, we see undocumented migrants, quite a few of them, but since Sweden has a policy of giving healthcare to undocumented migrants, we usually don't perform healthcare for them, psychosocial treatment, legal advice, and so on. Most patients we see are actually EU migrants. They're destitute EU citizens who come to us because they lack insurance. And actually, it's only about 10% of the people who come to us who are insured in the European healthcare system. Most of them lack the little blue card that for a Swede it's very, very easy to just get, but if you're Roma from Romania, it's not that easy. Actually, it's quite impossible. And we find layer after layer of discriminatory structures like this in Europe and in our own countries. And I think one of the things you can do is you can start questioning those discriminatory structures and say, hey, this is actually not right. So almost 60% of the pregnant people we see in Europe, and this is statistics from all of our clinics all over Europe, about 60% of the women we meet hadn't had any relevant care before giving birth. And that's a huge problem, actually. It's a problem for the individual woman, for the child, but it's also a problem for the society because you have people who have not had sufficient care coming in to deliver babies. Also, another huge healthcare issue is that from the destitute people we see in Europe, a vast majority of them are not vaccinated against things like measles. So I'm going to tell you, measles does not care what's in your passport. Like, seriously, not. So if we have this is about 6 million people who are this destitute in Europe. If we have about 6 million people in Europe, of which maybe 2/3 are not vaccinated, this is a problem, and it's not their problem. It's a problem for everyone in our society. And just to give you an idea, the problem is not to stop them at the borders to make sure we don't have measles, because measles doesn't care about borders either. If we have major measles infections in Romania, we're going to have them here. Okay? So we need the development goal of making sure that we do have health. So living conditions, poor living conditions are bad for your health. Little to no access to healthcare is really bad for your possibility to work, and so on. And actually, one of the things that I'm going to tell you is that I said this dichotomy about the financial and the human rights-based perspective, that it's seen as two opposing things. Quite often we also gender these things. We say that it's the hard and the soft values. We talk about the more pragmatic, and we talk about the goodness of women. Quite often when I speak to audiences, there will be more women in the audience if I speak about healthcare or social sector or even sustainable development. And this is very interesting, because for me, actually, talking about human rights is anything but just soft. This is talking about law and order, because we do have conventions and they are legally binding. If we look at the Charter, the European Charter, if we look at a lot of these things, they are actually quite high up in all of our constitutions and in our legal frameworks. And in Sweden, if you look at the legality, the order, the pecking order of the law, you will find that the regulations on how much you should pay when you receive hospital care, for instance, that regulation is very far down the food chain looking at laws, as opposed to some of the higher ones. And I'm going to give you a word which I hope that you will use, and it's the word jurisdiction. So the way that human rights and everything that we talk about here works is basically that any state has an obligation within its jurisdiction. When you have people, any people, who are in your jurisdiction, you have certain things you have to apply to how you deal with them. And the way that all of these laws are written, it is really about everyone. They are universal. So the whole thing with localizing the problem somewhere else is problematic also from the point of view that, of course, in Libya, we don't have jurisdiction. But the good thing is that we can argue for all of our policymakers that they follow the law. And although the rhetorics of the opposition to human rights quite often is that, no, we should have law and order, we need more law and order and less of this socialist softcore. In Sweden they use a word which is goodness junkie, that it's people who get high from feeling charitable, basically. So there's a narrative that this is somehow against law and order. And if there's one story I want you to come out and tell, it's that this is not against law and order, this is law and order. Law and order is treating everyone without discrimination. Law and order is ensuring every single person's equal right. So starting to discriminate on religion, I mean, we did that with the Jews, and I don't think we should go back there. Starting to discriminate when it comes to gender, sexuality, all of these, ableism, if you have a disability or not, all of those things, you shouldn't have different laws. We're all equal in front of the law. And that's one of the most significant things with a state that upholds law and order. So human rights is about law. It is keeping law and order. But it's also actually financially smart. So the Fundamental Rights Agency of EU, they did a report a couple of years ago called The Cost of Exclusion of Healthcare, the Case of Irregular Migrants in Europe. A catchy little title. And in this, they actually looked at a couple of countries and a couple of diagnoses or conditions. So they looked at maternity and maternity care. And they looked at high blood pressure. Hypertension. And they looked at what would it cost to treat this the same way as you treat your citizens. And what does it cost to not treat? And what they find is that in the case of hypertension, within a year, you have saved the same amount of money that you would for lifetime medication. So actually, I mean, the only thing I'm going to ask from my politicians is that I think healthcare should be based on evidence. Let's do evidence-based healthcare. Yeah? Do you agree? Sounds fair, okay. So if evidence suggests that as a doctor you treat a urinary tract infection in one way, if it's a Swedish person, chances are the treatment is going to look exactly the same if it's a Romanian person. Our biology is not that different. And the thing is that early treatment is cheaper and better. This goes for doing interventions early when it comes to pregnancy. It has to do, I mean, all of these things, of course. A stroke is incredibly expensive, and treating high blood pressure is the most important determinant for if people get stroke. being in a precarious situation will increase your blood pressure. So blood pressure is actually a very significant health threat when it comes to migrants. If it holds true for Swedish citizens, and I'm wagering Lithuanian citizens, it's going to hold true for migrants. So the financial argument is actually a false dichotomy. If we want discriminatory practices, we are making an investment in the billions in unnecessary suffering. We have to, if we want to discriminate, which I obviously don't, we have to advocate that with something else than the financial argument, because that's void. The human interest and the financial interest overlap. And this is, of course, what the Agenda 2030 is about, and understanding this. So if we're going to reduce inequality, we need to start at the local level. We need to start at the local level over there, and we need to start at the local level here. And we need to make sure that our governments are upholding the law, that they are neutral, that they actually treat everyone with the same equality. And counterproductive policies, especially at the local level, are dangerous. And they're dangerous because they also make it, from that point of view, it's difficult to answer the question, why should we do this? And how should we do this? But if you go back to the actual idea of the thing that, oh, yeah, we should do evidence-based healthcare, we should have, we should be equal in front of the law, you know, if you go back to those things, it's really simple. We should do this because we are a rights-based society. So, incidentally, the Global Goal 3, which I, of course, talk a lot about because I'm in the health sector, one of them is to achieve a universal health coverage. And I said in the beginning that you can't achieve something by doing the opposite. And of course, this is true here. If we're going to have universal health coverage, we need to implement universal health coverage. It's not more difficult than that. And everybody actually needs to have access to safe care. If we adopt policies that we know are increasing inequality in our own societies, I'm going to go back to Global Goal 10, we're not going to get equality. And health is one of those determinants that will define if you can work, to what extent you can work, and be part of our societies. And to conclude, achieving the global sustainability is, of course, something we do locally. So it might seem obvious, and it's all there, but now it's up to us, and it's up to you to tell these stories. So let's make it happen.
Thank you very much. Quite emotional and inspiring presentation. Do you have any question? From the audience?
Everybody's hungry. You can talk to me later, and you can ask me what Médecins du Monde is, because I'm wagering not many of you know, but maybe you know us a little bit more now.
Yeah. Thank you very much.
So thank you.